you
Yeah.
play Jenga? My crazy metaphor is that healing trauma is like building that thing up. And when you get trauma, it's like the whole thing tumbling down. You're talking about going slow in this work.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's so important because if you're building up this Jenga mountain, if you go too fast, you're going to re-traumatize the person. There's a risk that it's like we're doing this work that's so important, but we could also hurt the person. So we don't want to go fast, fast,
Uh,
fast to build it as quickly as you're right. The society is like, fix me, give me a pill and fix me as quickly as you can. And I'm out the office, but it's like, no, 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 no. This is a relationship. And the healing journey is just that. It's a journey.
Going Inside is a podcast on a mission to help people heal from trauma and reconnect with their authentic self. Join me, trauma therapist John Clark, for guest interviews, real-life therapy sessions, and soothing guided meditations. Whether you're navigating your own trauma, helping others heal from trauma, or simply yearning for a deeper understanding of yourself, Going Inside is your companion on the path to healing and self-discovery. Download free guided meditations and apply to work with me one-on-one at johnclarktherapy.com. Thanks for being here. Let's dive in. David Polidi is my guest today. I'm excited to welcome him to the show. He's a social worker. He has a podcast called Empowered Through Compassion. Today, we're going to be talking about IFS and EMDR, how to integrate the two, and we're going to see where it takes us. David, thanks again for being here. What else should people know in terms of, kind of expanding on that intro as to who you are and how you got here?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first, I want to say thank you for having me on your show. It's an honor to be here. I'm excited
My
about
pleasure.
talking with you and talking about IFS and EMDR. Uh,
Yeah,
I think
you
you
got
hit
it.
the main points. I'm a therapist. Social worker, and yeah, I love the both models, and I really believe that the integration of the two just makes them stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you talk more about how you came to each model? I mean, I've heard a little bit about this. Spoiler alert, I was on David's show recently, Empowered Through Compassion. So we've already kind of done some form of this conversation, or at least with you asking me the questions. But I'd love
Yeah,
to hear, some of that story again as to how you came to each of these models and where you're at with them
sure,
today.
sure. Well, I guess I've always loved counseling. Um, when I was in college, I took some counseling classes. I actually hated them and got into geography, but in my heart, just learning about psychology, it was always kind of fascinating, and I like being with people. I worked in the schools, and then after that, I started working in the community. And with when COVID hit, the community work wasn't really kind of the best place to be. I was a supervisor at that point, and I had a lot of people that
Mm,
were really worried about going into the community, and so a lot of it was kind of getting more and more centered on Zoom and telehealth, and so I kind of pivoted, and I realized like at that point, this is a good time to really do one-on-one work, go deep, and start doing trauma. There was just so much trauma kind of popping out everywhere. So I took an
yeah.
EMDR class. I always wanted to. I love EMDR, but I took a class in it, and it really kind of changed my life. I think the class itself was the teacher was good, but I met some people there, and then one person in particular, we started meeting every week, and then other people started joining in. So we have every week 5 people, and they're experienced counselors doing EMDR, and we share, oh, I read this book, I read that book. Let's talk about the newest movie that has, some kind of taste of memory and memory reconsolidation or something. And then one of the people in the class actually said to me, let's talk about EMDR.
Mm,
And then after that, I just drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak, but started doing EMDR, and that definitely, I feel, leveled up the work that I was able to do with people. And so
Yeah.
then doing that and the EMDR has just been recently, it's kind of taken over my life a little bit. It's been, and I really admire the work that you're doing with your podcast, because I see on my end having a podcast, the pay is it's not like you go into it wanting to be a millionaire, because you're not going to be, more than likely. Um, it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of,
Yeah.
you definitely need to love it and be committed to it and putting out regular content. Um, and the rewards are huge. I mean, I was looking
Yeah.
through your guests, and your guests are similar to my guests, and they're the kind of people, or they are the same people. They are the people that, like, I could just listen to for hours and hours. And it's like I hear me talk to them, I hear you talk to them, and they have so much wisdom that it's like, I think, what you're doing is a gift, to put that stuff out there. And yeah, it's been a really incredible ride for me.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, you and I share a similar mission with this stuff and started our shows around the same time. And I basically just had the sense that, yeah, number one, trauma is everywhere. People are realizing that and coming to therapy for it or seeking out all different types of therapy for it. Um, I know how much EMDR and IFS have changed my life. And so, just the thought of I want to do everything I can to help get this out there into people's hands.
Yeah.
I think one thing that really one difference between EMDR and IFS is um, like doing EMDR on yourself, not quite recommended. Um, although some people maybe do, or some people go to YouTube and type in BLS, EMDR, BLS, and watch the little dot go back and forth.
Mm.
Um, I wouldn't recommend doing that. On the other
No,
hand,
no.
IFS is not only a therapy model, but a spiritual model and almost a way of life. And so bringing that model to people even through like a podcast and talking about it is something people can kind of start doing right away. Or I was talking to someone recently and he said, he started reading No Bad Parts and basically did every exercise, the guided meditations, and went as far as he could with it on his own, and then went to a therapist to kind of continue that work. And like that's something that to me makes IFS so unique.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that I I think I'm kind of maybe switching my my answer here. I completely agree, and I'll put a little caveat in that. I think,
Yeah.
yes, IFS, as a model, is really about trying to have more awareness of what's going on inside in your inner world. And so
Mm.
that does seem like, we could do that wherever we are. It's just mindfulness and getting to know your parts. I like
Hmm.
to, for myself and for my clients, like, have them map out parts, by drawing them, by movement, like, what is that part? We're just being aware of, like, where does that part feel? Where does it feel like it is in your body right now?
Yeah.
And maybe if it's in your heart, you put your hand on your heart and just send some love to that part. Or, so I think there's a lot of ways to externalize your parts and feel your parts. And that's something that I don't think we ever become like, oh, I know how to do that perfectly. I think it's this
Yeah.
ongoing developmental kind of process that we're
Yeah.
always kind of getting more and more aware of how to connect with ourselves.
Yeah.
So that is absolutely something you do. I think with EMDR, you could, there's 8 phases of EMDR. And so, like, if you're talking about the second phase, some people like Rodham Breyer talks about in his book, um, he's a big one for meditation. So
Hmm.
he sees that as like the phase two, getting ready for the processing. So stuff like
Yeah.
that, I think that's where IFS and EMDR go hand in hand. Both of them are
Yeah.
wanting you to, pause a little bit, slow down your life, focus on yourself, focus on what you're needing, and really listening to what's going on inside.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Maybe you can keep going a little bit on that, or on, again, the integration of IFS and EMDR, and how, like, what does it look like for you lately as a practitioner to be kind of integrating both?
Now you're getting personal because
That's
my personal
that's
life,
the
I am
plan.
actually kind of in a state of transition where I'm
Yeah,
building up my client load. And so I was in this wonderful practice um, in Massachusetts where I'm at. And when I started diving deep into the IFS world, I I was kind of like, I want more, 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 more. So I went and applied to IFS Telehealth Collective, and so I'm part of that now. And
yeah,
in there, I'm little by little. I have 5 or 6, and every week there's somebody else. But anybody who's in Massachusetts um, could call them up, and we have people. I'm available. So I'm in the beginning phases, and so I think
mhm,
with the beginning phases, with the integration of the two models, I don't like to go right into um, the processing of the trauma. And I
yeah,
think a lot of it too is where I'm at. They're heavily on the IFS, and then I'm like coming into them going, "How about EMDR? I'll do EMDR too." But the agency the is really about IFS. But that being said, I think EMDR is really just how I see the world. It's like I got glasses right now. I have a bunch of glasses. I have one glasses that's these, right, and then I have another glasses which is my EMDR glasses, and I have another one which is my IFS lenses, and all of them together just help really focus things and make the colors really vibrant and dance. And so I'm always kind of like, and my consultant, his name is Bruce Hersey, and he's an amazing guy that he's co-founded this um, institute called Syzygy Institute with Michelle Richardson, and and they give classes, and you could even become certified in IFS informed EMDR through them.
mm,
And so
yeah,
this is coming from him. Um, I think that you're always kind of seeing where are you internally as a therapist. Where are you in terms of the 8 phases, which it doesn't necessarily have to go in order, and there's a lot of um, leeway in terms of flowing through the 8 phases, but where are you in them, and then where are you in terms of the work that you're doing within IFS. And so
yeah,
we start out really kind of mapping out that system, and doing
yeah,
history and getting to build that relationship, which is crucial in both models. And then
yeah,
understanding, okay, what are your goals? But before we could just rush to like your goals, let's check in with your system, and let's get a chance to know what are the players here. And then we could go a little bit, take a couple of steps, and go, who pops up, and let's get to know them and get some friends as we continue down our journey.
yeah. That's really well said. The the pacing of the work is very salient to what we do, and especially in the realm of trauma work. And I don't know if you find this to be true, but I find that a lot of times, it's like trauma happens fast and yet the healing happens slow. But a lot of times what happens is clients come in and they also want the healing to happen fast. So they might come in and like, okay, can we start the EMDR like in the first session or the second session? They're talking about the reprocessing, right? There's this sense of like, hurry up and get this out of me, kind of,
It's so
sentiment.
true. It's so
Yeah.
true. And I'll give you a metaphor. Do you
Yeah.
play Jenga?
I
Have you
have,
ever
yeah,
played
so
Jenga? All right, so
I
let's
can get
you
the
and me play a
metaphor
game
for
of
sure.
Jenga. And we're gonna,
Yeah.
you go and I go, and you go and I go, and kind of having fun, and you take out that little Jenga piece and put it on top. And I guess one object of the game is to try to not make it fall down when you're building it up. But let's put that aside. Let's say you and I are playing this game, and our goal is to build it as high as we possibly can, where it gets to the point where you can't take out another piece because now you're messing with the legs, or you're messing with a middle layer that if you take it out, it's all good. So we're just trying to build it as high as we can. My crazy metaphor is that healing trauma is like building that thing up. And when you get trauma, it's like the whole thing tumbling down. So we're building it up, trying to get a form as high as we can. But yeah, when trauma happens, it's like destruction, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great metaphor. I might steal it, but I will reference you. I'll give you credit where credit's due. um, yeah, and so slowing it all down and realizing that the healing is slow, perhaps slower than we would like at times. Also, we're in a culture, at least here in the US, of
Well, can I say
efficiency
one
and
more thing?
productivity.
I,
Please.
I okay, I apologize. I like interrupting, so please bear with me. But I want to go back to the metaphor because it just kind of popped in my head. I'm like, let me tell you this one more thing. So what it just came up was you're talking about going slow in this work,
Yeah.
and I feel like that's so important because if you're building up this Jenga mountain, if you go too fast, you're gonna re-traumatize the person. There's a risk that it's like we're doing this work that's so important, but we could also hurt the person. So we don't want to go fast, fast,
The
fast to build it as quickly as you're right. The society is like, fix me, give me a pill and fix me as quickly as you can. And I'm out the office, but it's like, no, 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 no. This is a relationship. And the healing journey is just that. It's a journey. And, yeah, we're not going to try to like just take it on for years and years and as long as we can, but we kind of need to allow the process to unfold the way the process needs to unfold. And so I like the Jenga thing where you have somebody who's overly anxious, or they have a part that has urgency. They topple the thing down. Great. Now we're back at the beginning. Now we're re-traumatized.
Yeah. Yeah, man, and I can attest to that. When I first got EMDR trained, went to the weekend one training in like 2015, 2014, 2015, I think it was. And we were doing our like practice sessions in another room, and this was in person. This was before COVID, so everything was in person. And we had all spread out in our, pairs or whatever. And I wanted to be a good client, so I brought something very real to the session. I used to be an EMT, and uh,
Mm.
as you can imagine, have some trauma from that and some real specific calls that haunted me and stuck with me. And so I thought, again, like, I'm going to be a good client, give this therapist something real to work with. And I ended up paying for it because it's not really her fault. She was new to the model, as was I. And so we started the session, started the reprocessing, got into it a little bit. And about halfway through, she kind of panicked and got stuck and started flipping through the manual and didn't know where to go or what to do. And she kind of like forgot about me. I was just sitting there, literally getting
Ooh.
flooded and back in the memory of it. And I'm so polite and I'm from the South that I like didn't want to say anything, but here I am, like,
Now,
I'm
see,
I'm
I'm
about to
from
have
New
a bad
York. I'd be like, "Yo, I'm here. I'm here. Don't
Yeah,
forget."
I should channel more of that energy because I just sat there, getting completely flooded and frozen and back in that memory, to the point where she was just like, "I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do." She went and got the instructor who came and had to work with me for probably half an hour to kinda get me
Wow.
back. So it was a horrible experience. I mean, I can even feel it in my body right now as I remember that. And yet it was so valuable in teaching me the potency of EMDR and the importance of, um, when you're in it, keep going. the pacing, sticking with it, staying present with your client, letting them know I'm here, right?
Yeah.
I'm in this with you, even if we're bouncing around a bit, or do we go back to the touchstone memory or whatever it is, like. And then we think about some of the 8 C's of IFS, and courage being one of them, right? A lot of times, whether it's IFS or EMDR, it's like having that courage to keep going and keep walking into the darkness a bit with clients. Um, but man, I just remember that so vividly, and walking out of that training being like, okay, now I know firsthand how
Mhm.
dangerous this can be, right? To put someone back in their trauma like that, right?
Yeah.
Or if an EMDR therapist is at the end of a session and you're in the thick of it, right? You don't have time to wrap up, right, and help the client come back down, like, it can be really scary.
Absolutely. No, it's so true. And a lot comes up inside of me because one thing is, both you and I are consultants. And I found for myself having a consultant is invaluable.
Yeah, yeah,
It's so good to have somebody with you as a therapist to be able to care for your parts that come up, to be able to kind of help you through that because there is definitely an art to it all. The other thing that comes up for me is that, particularly with EMDR, I think with IFS, there's there this is a loaded statement for IFS, so I'll keep it off the table for IFS. But for EMDR, think you need to be a therapist. I think that being whatever kind of practitioner you are, um,
yeah,
and maybe that's even a coach, but you need to be somebody who is comfortable going into these arenas of trauma
yeah,
and being able to fall back on your training because not everything is answered. It's,
absolutely,
it's a model, so
absolutely.
it's going to guide you. But at some point, you're going to have to say, if it comes from like my own expertise within my field or the model, I'm going to go with my expertise in the field every day.
Man, you nailed it, and I tell my I have clinicians at my practice, it's a training practice, that don't forget you're a therapist first. You're a therapist first who has now learned EMDR or is using EMDR. And a lot of times this is an important reminder to them because they'll have a similar kind of oh crap moment in the middle of a session of like, what step am I on? Where am I at the protocol? Right? Like, do I do the cognition now? Like, um, and it pulls them out of the moment. They forget to be present, or a client gets flooded and they are scrambling. Right. So to your point, I totally agree. We have to have these basic skills of kind of, yeah, having solid clinical foundation. I agree about that this should just be used by therapists. The EMDR should just be used by therapists, again, because of its potency, which I really respect and honor, and that's part of why it works, and also part of why we have to just be really judicious with how we apply it, and again how we pace it, right? Because the client, or
Right.
like me at that in that demo, like I wanted to be a good client and get right into it, and also I thought, hey, maybe this EMDR could help me with this memory that has been really sticky for me, really, really, really hot memory. So it's like, um, there's that too. The clients are well intending of like, I want to be a good client. I want to bring the real stuff, right?
And could I make an assumption here? And you tell me if I'm right or
Go
wrong
for it.
because it's an assumption. My assumption is that and I kind of know this because you told me, but you were in that class. This was before all of your learning and awareness of IFS.
Right, that's right.
Because now with IFS, there's another layer, which is
Yeah,
something that I don't think EMDR brings to the table, but I love saying this when you combine the two. You got the scalpel of EMDR that could be very helpful for trauma. You need to check in with all the parts.
that's
I was
right.
talking with
Yeah,
Annabelle McGoldrick, and there's others as well. Yeah, IFS really kind of sets the stage to see that we're going to get permission from everybody inside of us. So you,
yeah,
as that client in the class, had a part or a couple of parts that were like, "Oh man, this is cool. I'm going to be good. I'm going to do what I need to do, and we're going to go get this trauma and kick it out of our body." But
yeah,
I wonder, I don't know, but I wonder what would have happened if you had that moment to really go in and see if there was any parts that had any fears or any parts that did have any
totally.
concerns. And if they were addressed, maybe that would have been a very different experience.
100%. Part of what I love about IFS is when we go into someone's system completely respecting and honoring their system and its protective nature, its protectors who have been doing their job for a very long time, and I'm just some dude walking into the system, right? So I always kind of try to have that humility in someone's system, right? Of like, you're the boss, protectors are the bosses, and we slowly earn
Oh
their
yeah.
trust, perhaps, you know, which can take, it can be fast, it can take a very long time. It just depends. Um, you know, I help run the the training groups at Stepping Stones, for folks learning IFS, and one thing that I have started suggesting that they do in these demos is let the client know, to let the parts know that nothing needs to happen today, and to also invite protector concerns around doing this demo in this setting on Zoom with a bunch of people or with like an instructor in the room, whatever. Because oftentimes they'll get into the session and things will start to kind of get sticky, or someone will be kind of bouncing in and out of insight. And the clinician is like wondering why, or they're a little frustrated, right? And it's like, why won't this work go deeper? And even halfway through a session, if you stop and just go, yeah, just ask inside, any parts have concerns around doing this session right now? Any parts have concerns around going a little deeper? Or if you want to go further, any parts have concerns about me, right? This guy, right? Who's doing the session. And even if there aren't, I find it's really helpful just to invite those and honor that we're in this strange setting. And also, parts have an idea that this therapist doesn't know what they're doing, right? Or to your point with my EMDR training, it's like I would have had protector concerns that this therapist is new and doesn't know how to do EMDR yet. No disrespect, right? Neither did I. Um, and those parts could have kept me safe in that moment for sure.
Yeah. Well, and there's a double thing here that's going on too, which is
Yeah.
if we're kind of focused on that room where you're in your training and you're being the good client, you're checking in with your parts. I would say too, and again, I realize it's not an IFS training, but at that moment, wouldn't it have been great if the person who was doing EMDR with you also checked in on her parts?
Yeah. That could have also saved things from derailing, right? Because we
Yeah.
also have parts that really wanna get it right too. So, again, with folks
Oh,
learning
yeah.
EMDR and even my clinicians who really wanna get it right and they wanna be precise, they wanna adhere to the model so much that it ends up, affecting the work, or the client gets a sense of, like, this therapist is not present, they're not with me, they're not competent, because of parts that really wanna kind of get it right or perfect or stick to the script perfectly.
And can I tell you an issue that I have?
Please,
And I'm gonna
this is the this is
tell you an issue.
this is the place to
I
do
got an
it.
issue here. I have
Hopefully, it's
an
not an issue with
issue
me,
where
but
no, 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 no,
I'm
no.
just joking.
Um, I have an issue with some EMDR, some of the ways that are sometimes EMDR is done and
Yeah,
taught and experienced, and I might be upsetting a lot of people. I think there's a lot of people that do it in a way that is beautiful, and, I was just talking with, the people Notice That. I'll give a plug to that podcast. They're amazing, and, they have a really good sense with it. However, when you dive into the history of EMDR, the little knowledge that I have, that I've heard, is that there is sometimes a feeling of rigidity where this is the model,
yeah,
you stick to the model, you don't go off the script, you really do it this and this and this way. And when people kind of try to buck the system, so to speak, they kind of get excommunicated or
yeah,
exiled. We're using IFS lingo. And maybe not. Again, I don't have all the information, but I think there's some amazing models out there that I'll throw out the name. I wish maybe one day either you or I could talk to her. Laurel Parnell. She has,
mhm,
the attachment focused EMDR, and that's beautiful. But I think if we're going back in time to the original intent, and it was this amazing model to heal trauma, and it did, but it was for, a certain type of trauma that was not complex. And it was very, single incident trauma. You had a car crash. Now let's talk about it.
Yeah.
And now with neuroscience and everything else being introduced into the field, there's definitely an awareness that it shouldn't or can't really be simplified and boiled down to just the basics. That as you get more and more into the world of EMDR, you're always learning. There's always more things to learn. There's more and more protocols. But then there's also like this art to it where you're sometimes even creating your own protocol in the moment, from where you're at, as long as you
Yeah.
understand, the importance of all the basic stuff. So what am I saying? I guess I'm saying that that openness is so important. And I think that, I don't know how much, when people learn in the basics, how much this is emphasized. Maybe
Yeah.
sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But I think that human to human contact, that human to human connection, and then co-regulation is so crucial.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk about the co-regulation piece for sure. I'll say something briefly on the protocol piece or on the, y- you know, I tend to practice EMDR more fluidly, maybe in part because, yeah, I've been doing it a while, and also I guess I'm a person that has to kind of make it my own to do it. That's not to say I don't still do it the way I learned it, but um, to me, it has to be more fluid. And now that I integrate it with IFS and I'm doing both in the same session, um, I am kind of doing it the way my intuition tells me to do it, right? And trying to, yeah, leaning on my own self energy to help me figure out how to do EMDR in this session. Um, and that's a little bit different. And I think, like, on one hand, my qualm uh, early on with any protocol treatment is like, I get that it needs to be unified in part to then go teach it and deliver it and say, this is the way you do it, and you follow it this way, and this is when you ask for the cognition, and then they rate it 0 to 100, versus like the cognition might float up naturally, right? Or they have this belief of like, I deserved it, right? In relation to the memory that you're working on or whatever. Um, but what was I saying about that? Kind of losing the plot here.
We're getting so
Yeah,
into
I
this
was okay.
conversation and into the stuff that we're both like
Yeah,
disappearing into the into the
the
the uh
vortex.
the great models that we're talking about.
Making a model, protocol in part to deliver it and say, "Here's how you do it, and here's how to replicate it." Also, it's easier to study when it's a protocol. Something like DBT, right, is very easy to study and say, "This worked," or you could have 10 different clinicians do DBT and stick to the modules page by page and say, "This is like" they did it in a pretty unified way, a
Well, and let's
uniform
face it,
way.
it
So I
makes
get
the
that too.
research a lot easier too.
That's what I'm saying.
If we're talking about models that
That's
we're
my whole
trying to
point.
get out there into the world, and we're trying to get
Yeah,
them evidence-based, it helps them to to prove it on
tremendously.
paper with the
Yeah.
statistics.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So I guess it's a balance, right? And then again, also like from the institute's perspective, wanting to maintain a certain quality of quality control of EMDR, I get that too, right? That's important as well. So I think it's a dance. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I completely
Yeah.
agree with that.
Where else you want to go from here?
Um, wow, it could go anywhere. Um, I don't know, how serious do you want it? Do you want it to be stick with IFS and EMDR? Go on to something else? I could ask you a question and switch roles here. Ask you one of my
Oh,
questions.
always open to that. Yeah.
All right. I'll ask you, or you can ask me. You can turn it around. But what I love to talk about is how how do you bring in spirituality to all of this? And how
Man,
would you
that is a
say,
huge question. Yeah.
yes, it is. How would you fit your spirituality understanding, into therapy in general, and then into EMDR, and then into IFS, and into the integration of the two of them?
Yeah, this is a great question and a huge one. And I would say I'm right in the thick of finding my own answers with that. I will say the first time I did an unburdening with a client, that's an IFS unburdening with a client, it was one of the most spiritual experiences I've ever had or witnessed in my life. Um, and the first time that happened, I had the thought that this is true healing. And a lot of what I've done since 2009, being a therapist, was not quite healing, not quite like that. And seeing this part go from this scared, frozen place to coming into the present, to releasing its burdens and using one of the elements, to installing new qualities, to finding its new home in the present with my client. Just the beauty of that moment, how natural that all came to the client, even though they didn't have to understand what we were doing here. And to an extent, I was just following the protocol like early on, like literally had the unburdening steps like in a piece of paper, right? Just like, okay, now ask it, does it want your help getting rid of anything? Perhaps using one of the elements. I'm like reading this question word for word. Um, so that really changed my life, honestly. And once I realized that that was possible for clients and for me, that changed everything for me. So that's one piece that is deeply spiritual for me. To bring it back, I think what's funny is a lot of times with IFS, the conversation starts by talking about parts and multiplicity. I almost think the conversation should start with talking about self and really getting clients on board with this idea of self, because I think that's where you can also wrap in their spirituality and however they see that, right? Um,
Mm, yeah.
However they want to define self as your authentic self, divine energy, a God image inside of you. Um, it's like I want to invite all of those perspectives in for them to just see that there is this well of purity and goodness and love inside of you, and I'm basically here to help you tap into that and bring that to parts of you that are
All right, so
hurting and
I got
parts
a,
of
I
you
got
that
a
are protecting
challenging
you.
question for you then. Then we
Okay.
could turn it around. I don't want to steal
All
the
right.
show and make the interview. But my challenging question for you is, then what do you do if you started out by focusing on self energy? Because I do think there's definitely a beauty to that, and that feels like that's such an important key part of the model. But then you have a client who has a part that loves to do spiritual bypassing. And that part
Yeah.
comes out and goes, "Oh boy, yes, I will tell you all about my spirituality." And then that part
Yeah.
gets to be the biggest one in the room.
I wanna say I encountered this recently with a client, and here's
Cool.
my answer. It's gonna feel like kind of a cop out, which is, to me, inside of me, there's a felt sense of what self feels like inside of me. And I know that sense, and I'm getting to know it more. I can usually kind of tell when it's here, when I have a great percentage of that versus when I have less of a percentage of that. Same goes for my clients. I usually have a sense of the kind of texture of what self energy feels like in the room with my client. And so when I had a client recently who was just kind of agreeing with whatever I was asking and kind of like speaking about the part of like, ask the 4-year-old, what it's afraid of. Oh, yeah, so I asked and it said it's kind of like kind of afraid of mom leaving, right? And it's like, is that you assuming you know what the 4-year-old is afraid of, or did you ask the 4-year-old, right? So I had a sense that some of that was happening too, right? Kind of an intellectualizing of what's happening here, and again, kind of being a good client going along with it. But to me, the texture of that felt different because earlier on in the session, when she first encountered the 4-year-old, there was a major slowing down. Her complexion changed, her body relaxed.
Yeah.
She was tearful. She just felt this love toward the 4-year-old. Can you send it that love and see what happens? And she was in that. And that texture and that quality is very different than where we were at 2 minutes later. So That's my answer.
Yeah, that's
Your turn.
great. And then you just call her out on it. You say, "I wonder if
Well,
this
I
is a
just
part."
clarify. Yeah, I just ask. Yeah, is this yeah, exactly, basically, or and even going back to, is it still you in the room with this 4-year-old, or are you now watching a part interact with this 4-year-old,
Mm,
right, or
yeah,
self-like part,
yeah,
right? And sure enough, it was a part. Okay, so think that part. Can you go ahead and step in, make sure it's you seeing through your eyes the 4-year-old and being with the 4-year-old? Can the 4-year-old still sense that you're there? And we had to reestablish that connection right there in that moment. And I said, just take your time reestablishing that connection with the 4-year-old, just to really make sure that self to part connection is there and it's true before we continue. So, yeah.
yeah, yeah, no, that's
All right, your
great.
turn.
That Oh boy, I thought you were gonna ask me that. Okay, so I got a story for you. I will be personal right now. I
Love it.
so I believe that we're all human beings and we're all in this human experience together, experiencing things, together. Going through COVID. I was going through COVID just like my clients were going through COVID. Where it's not like the
Mhm.
separate kind of, I'm the therapist, you're the client. So when I was studying EMDR, I was saying to myself, I'll go to EMDR therapy. I got stuff from my past and I'm gonna try out what it's like in the other seat. And right now, I'm currently in IFS therapy, and
Yeah.
it's amazing. But so I had this experience where I was with a part and trying to bring as much self energy into the space that I could. And I don't remember exactly what I was working on within myself with therapy, but I remember I have a very clear vision of the part that I was working with, and it was a kid that was just drowning. He was in the bottom of the sea, weights on him, and he just was like not doing well. And trying to go in and feel your inner parts and help them, give them love. I went in, I try to like do like a lifeguarding thing and pull him out, and I was just sitting with him. I was just like, as myself, I guess, or myself energy, just kind of sitting with him and waiting for something to happen. And my therapist was great, and she just kind of, we took our time. And then all of a sudden, the guy that I was sitting with, the little boy, just like melted and turned to water. And I was like, oh man, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my brain? That's not like, where does that, where, I didn't know where in the book, like, we sit with a part and it just melts. And I was a little bit kind of freaked out. And what she said was really brilliant, but she said that was just a spontaneous, unburdening. Like, well, I mean, she
That's
had some things
yeah,
that she said first.
that's right.
It wasn't like, "Are you nuts?" It was more along the lines of, "Well, how does it feel to you?" Like this part is just a burden. Like, what is the energy? What is the feeling behind it? And it was a sense of like freedom, where the little boy had turned into water and was now like this free water within the ocean that we were sitting by. And so instead of sitting there and being sad, it was that energy was just kind of like laughing and splashing around. So I think at that point she's like, that feels like a spontaneous unburdening. And it was so powerful. I mean, going back to the
Yeah,
question of, how do we
yeah,
bring spirituality in the room and in the work? There was something just so spiritual to me about that experience where it was somatic and
yeah,
it was, you felt it, but it was also like you could feel a little bit of a sense of like a higher power there as well. So
totally.
that was pretty intense.
Wow. Yeah, wow, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, my, like, inclination would have been just to ask you to keep connecting with the water, right? Or ask the water a question once it turned to water. I also had the thought, recently, do you know this guy, Michael Hunter? He's a IFS
Mhm.
practitioner. He's been a Chinese medicine doctor for 25 years, and now does IFS, does a lot of helping clients find their spirit guides. So there's an episode on my show about that with Michael, and
So
he
so I
walked
have a
through the
list of
process.
things that I wanna listen to, that one was on my list. I
Oh,
definitely,
okay.
I am so interested in it because you talked to Bob Falconer too, right?
I
Did
talked
you
to
talk to
Bob
Bob?
as well.
Yeah. So we
So
both did it.
same
He's
kind of
like the
vein.
master of
Yeah.
that. So what
Yeah,
did
but my
Mr. Hunter
well,
say?
Michael in
Michael.
the episode, he walked me through this, the process he takes clients through that, and he's trying to help IFS practitioners connect with their first spirit guide. And he says, and this is rooted in Chinese medicine, is that the first spirit guide that we can all connect with is water. And so he walks you through this process of
Oh
connecting
wow.
to water as your first spirit guide. So I'll let him explain the rest, in that episode, but he would not be surprised with that spontaneous unburdening and the water elements. So definitely check out that episode. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that would make a lot of sense to someone like him.
Hmm. That's so
Yeah.
fascinating. And that brings me back to
Yeah.
podcasting because you and me, we could probably like just riff on the different people that we've talked to. There's
Yeah.
so many good people out there. You know, when you look and there's like an
Yeah.
endless supply of just amazingly rich conversations and just
Yeah.
really brilliant people that like you start talking to and I get blown away. You know, I get blown away by like, wow, look at all this amazing work that you're doing in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, and to your point, like, it would be a shame if we don't get their voices out more into the world, and, the byproduct also is that I end up learning a ton from them, from these experts, who are renowned in their area, especially these different kind of pockets of IFS that they're in. Um, so I'm really lucky that people keep saying yes to coming on the show and offering that to both me and the audience. Yeah, and you're right. We could keep riffing about this stuff and about all these wonderful guests and figures and personalities within this realm, and it's just great to keep these conversations going. So, yeah. That being said, we're just about at time, David. Anything you want to make sure you kind of get out there today in this episode? Any thoughts lingering from what we've talked about?
No, I think we said a lot. I mean, I think we can go on for another hour, 2 or
Yeah.
3, but I think we hit like some really cool points in our discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you making the interview more of a two-way street too, and throwing a question my way. Um, I really that's fun. Yeah, well, David, that being said, how can people learn more about you and your work and even reach out to possibly work with you?
Yeah, well, definitely check out my podcast, Empowered Through Compassion. Um, and I'm working on my website, so it's a work in progress, but soon it's gonna sparkle. I look to like other websites, and I'm like, man, those look good. Your website looks really nice. So I'm working on that to really kind of showcase the podcast and also to try to showcase all the guests. So when I have a guest, you can see like all of the stuff that they contributed to the field on like their own little page or something. And then so that's going to have ways to contact me on you know all the social media sites. And then if you're interested in IFS therapy, definitely IFS Telehealth Collective has some incredible people there that are leading the way, and they're in multiple states throughout the country. If you're in Massachusetts, I'd love to talk with you, and also consultation. You know, if anybody's looking for consultation,
Yeah.
I love talking with people, whether it's one time or you know we start something where it goes every week or every month. Um, yeah, get in contact with me. I love meeting people.
That's great. That's great. Awesome. David, you're the man. Thank you so much for doing this, and, yeah, I'd love to have you back anytime, so we'll have to
God,
put
I love
something in the
that
books
too.
for another
I
one,
got my soul
and,
brother here, so
there you go.
we're so similar in
Yeah.
the IFS, EMDR, the pocket. So yeah, I love talking with
Yeah.
you.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you again, and, yeah, I'll see you in the next one.
Sounds good. I look forward to it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Going Inside. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching, and share your favorite episode with a friend. You can follow me on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at John Clark Therapy, and apply to work with me one-on-one at johnclarktherapy.com. See you next time.